work on operations on integers. And we're going to start with adding and subtracting integers. If you look at the two tiles below, the red one here represents +1 and the white one represents -1. Together, they create 0 because it's like having +1 subtract 1, which we already know 1 take away 1 is 0. So we're going to look at a few examples here. If I look at this one, I've got +2, +3. So +2 would be 2 red squares. +3, still positive, 3 red squares. And together, if we count it all up, we have 5 red squares. So +2, +3 is 5. We already know that from elementary school. That's no different than what we've been learning for years. What's a little bit different is when we look at this one here, which is -4 take away 3. So -4 is 4 white tiles. -3, 3 white tiles. And we count them all up to get a total of 7 white tiles. So -4 take away 3 is 7. So what happened there? When we had all the same sign, we added them, all positives, we added them up, they kept the sign. When we had all negatives, we added them up and kept the sign. So that leads us to the summary, and to summarize our first rule, when two numbers have the same sign, we add the digits and keep the sign. So if we look at -2, take away 4, the signs are the same, they're both negative. We don't see any extra signs in between, so there's only one sign in front of each number. So -2 take away 4, same sign, add them up, we've got 6, keep the negative, so -2, -4 is 6. +2, +4, well, that's just what we've learned right from grade 1 on, but again, it follows the rule. Both positive, add the numbers, so 2 + 4 is 6, and keep the sign so it's positive. Now, if we look at this example here, we've got +2 take away 3, or +2, -3. Two positives we know are 2 red squares. 3 negatives are 3 white squares. Well, we can't add them all together like we did in the last one. However, we do know that a red one and a white one, they're opposite, and a +1 - 1 is 0. So we've got 1 0. And then we see another pair of 0, +1 - 1, and what's left over is a -1. So +2 - 3 is in fact -1. We look at this example, we've got +4, -2. So 4 reds and then 2 whites. That's a 0. We have another 0. And we're left with 2 positives. So +4, -2 left us +2. Oops, that's a typo. Left us +2. So this answer was positive, but the answer before was negative. How can we figure out whether the answer will be positive or negative? With negative here, if we look back to our original expression, I had more negatives than positives, didn't I? And then here, I had more positives than negatives in my original expression. So that leads me to the conclusion that when the numbers have opposite signs, I'm going to just subtract the digits and keep the sign on the larger one. So if I go back here, I have 2 more positives than negatives, and that's what I can see by subtracting 4 take away 2, and I keep the sign. Here, I had 1 more negative than positive. There were 3 negatives, 2 positives, so there were more negatives. Subtract them, 3 take away 2 is 1. I have more negatives, so I keep the negative sign. So -3, +7, if I subtract them, I've got a 4, and there are more positives, so the answer is +4. If I look at it, part B, it's -7, +3. There are opposite signs. There are 4 more negatives than positives. 7 take away 3 is 4. More negatives, keep the negative sign. Now let's take a look at this example. +2, -3. You'll notice there's no sign between the 2 and the bracket. That indicates that we're going to multiply. If I look at this, +2 times -3. Multiplication means I'm creating groups, so I can consider this to be two groups of -3. So if I create one group of -3 here and another group of -3 over here, I've ended up with a total of -6. If I look at this example, I've got -3 times +4. But we all know that it doesn't matter if we do 3 times 4 or 4 times 3. So I'm going to write my positive first and do +4 times -3, which would give me 4 groups of -3. So I've got 1 group, 2 groups, 3, 4 groups for a total of -12. So it didn't matter whether the positive was first or second, as long as I had one of each. When I multiplied them together, I ended up with a negative. So the first rule when we're multiplying and dividing integers is if they have opposite signs and there are two numbers, you will end up with a negative. So -2 times +3, multiply the numbers, and you've got one negative and one positive. The answer will be -6. +2 times -3, again, a positive times a negative gives me a negative, and just multiply the digits. Division, +6 divided by -3. Same thing, divide the numbers. 6 divided by 3 is 2. I've got a positive and a negative, opposite signs, we have a negative answer. In part D, same thing, 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now we look at the signs. I've got a negative divided by a positive, opposite signs, the answer will remain negative. So in general, doesn't matter, negative times positive, negative times positive, positive times negative, sorry, that should have been positive times negative. Here, negative times positive, positive divided by a negative, or negative divided by a positive will always give you a negative. If two numbers with the same sign are multiplied, the answer is going to be positive. We already know +2 times +3 is 6, because we learned that way back when. And I could go through a patterning chart to show you two negatives will give you a positive, but I'm not going to do that for the sake of making the lesson move a little bit faster. Two the same sign when you're multiplying or dividing gives you a positive. So -2 times -3, multiply the numbers. 2 and 3 gives you 6. Same sign, it's positive. 2 and 3 gives you 6. Same sign, it's positive. 6 divided by 3 is 2. Same sign, it's positive. 6 divided by 3 is 2 here. Again, same sign, +2 is the answer. So in general, a positive times a positive, negative times a negative, positive divided by a positive, or a negative divided by a negative, all give you a positive answer. So if we look at this, we just have to decide what operation we're given. Negative times a negative is a positive, so the answer is going to be positive. 3 times 5 is 15. Positive divided by a negative is going to be a negative, and 40 divided by 8 is 5. -1 cubed. That's an interesting expression. What does that mean? It means a -1 times -1 times -1. Now, if we look right here, a negative times a negative, we do multiplication and division in the order they occur according to BEDMAS. So -1 times -1. That's a negative times a negative, which is a positive, and 1 times 1 is 1. So we're left with +1 times -1. Well, now we have a positive times a negative, which gives us a negative. A few more examples to go. -2 times -7. Remember, again, the brackets are there. There's no sign in between them. It tells us it's multiplication. So a negative times a negative always gives us a positive. So 2 times 7 is 14. E is 0 divided by -4. If I have nothing and I share it with anybody, I'm still giving them nothing. So it doesn't matter whether I share nothing with a positive or a negative, I still have nothing, and the answer remains 0. 12 divided by -6. We don't see a sign here, but we do know that if we don't see a sign, that the number is in fact positive. So positive 12 divided by -6. Positive divided by a negative is a negative. 12 divided by 6 is 2. So the answer is -2. Part G, we need to remember a little bit of BEDMAS. We're taking all of the numerator and dividing by the denominator. So we can do the numerator first. Negative times a positive is a negative. And 2 times 9 is 18. So we get negative 18 over negative 3. And negative divided by a negative is a positive. And 18 divided by 3 is 6. And that's it for today. And I would like you to complete page 2, number 1 to 3 in your workbook, page 3, number 31, A, B, C, G, H, and question 32. And don't forget that when you get into class tomorrow, we will be having a homework quiz on what we've talked about today. And make sure that you've copied the notes completely for what you didn't get done in class.